a alguien que representa a Alemania. Un tema muy interesante es Whistleblowing para combatir la corrupción en perspectiva internacional comparada, y estará dada por Daniel Knecht, quien tiene estudios en la Universidad de Augsburgo con especialización en Derecho Penal Internacional y Derecho Procesal Penal, pasantía en el Tribunal del Distrito de Memmingen, con un periodo en Berlín en un bufete de abogados especializados en Derecho Penal Sexual y Derecho Penal Tributario. Ha sido admitido en el Colegio de Abogados de Múnich y es asociado especializado en Derecho Laboral y Derecho Penal en uno de los principales bufetes de abogados especializados en dichas materias en Múnich. En la actualidad trabaja como un Compliance Officer para un grupo multinacional del sector de defensa con sede principal en Múnich y dirige su propia boutique de Derecho Laboral y Derecho Penal, cuyas oficinas están ubicadas en Ulm y Múnich. Bien, quiero participar también que esta ponencia va a ser dada en inglés. Va a haber subtítulos para que podamos seguir la exposición. Y finalmente nosotros vamos a tener también las traducciones de las exposiciones que se han dado en otro idioma. Quiero dar la bienvenida, doctor Daniel Knecht, a este congreso organizado por el Colegio de Abogados de Arequipa. Acá son las tardes, muy buenas tardes. De repente en Alemania ya estamos un poco más tarde, o de noche. Bienvenido. Les doy el uso de la palabra.
Yes, Daniel, I think you have understood everything what Dr. Astete have just said, but let me please just to be sure of it, a short introduction. He has just mentioned that a very brief summary of your life, your CV, and introduce yourself. Maybe you want to say something before I start, or do you want to go to the point?
Yeah, no, thank you, Mario, and thank you, Dr. Astarte, for the introduction. I must say in advance also thank you for this invitation to this International Anti-Corruption Congress. It is an honor to be able to speak to you and to have an exchange between lawyers from different countries. I think the topic of anti-corruption is an international one, and it is a great opportunity to have some exchange here and talk about the issues in the world. Perhaps a little bit at the beginning about why I'm telling you something about whistleblowing. In my position as an international compliance officer at a multinational defense group, I have, among other things, the responsibility of the technical solution of our group-wide whistleblowing reporting system. I'll tell you a little bit about that later, but basically this is the system where you are able to anonymously report an uncertain issue within the company or with a third party. And upon this responsibility within the last years, we recognized that there are a lot of significant changes regarding whistleblowing. It's a hot topic. And thus, I think it would be really interesting to tell you something about that from an international comparison.
Okay, thank you. Daniel, sorry for the brief interruption. I will just explain because they have put me as your core speaker, and you're the only one speaking here. They know, but I think there was a short confusion here. El doctor Daniel Knecht nos ha dicho de que él es él es un compliance officer, y él como compliance officer tiene dentro de sus especialidades y sus focos de trabajo el tema de whistleblowing. Solamente para clarificar, el expositor es el doctor Daniel Knecht. El doctor Knecht va a seguir con la exposición como tal, y luego de esto al final yo voy a hacer un resumen de la exposición y ayudarlos a ustedes al momento de hacer las preguntas, de entrar a la discusión. Dicho esto, le doy la palabra al doctor Knecht. Okay, Daniel, I have clarified that topic, so you have the word.
Yeah, I hope you can see my presentation. So I want to start with a little, let's take a step back and have a general discussion about what is the term of whistleblowing, because as I understand it, is a quite new topic in the country of Latin America. So whistleblowing is a term used every time when someone raises a concern about wrongdoing. Is it within a country, with a company, a public or private, or with a governmental decision organization? Every time we have someone on the inside who actively gives away information, this is called whistleblowing. And if you look at it from a very neutral aspect, you would think, okay, this is clearly illegal because you're giving away confidential data, confidential information, but it is something we actually want and we need that. And because it is the most effective way to actively combat corrupt system, because we need people who stand up for what they believe is right, who have a feeling of righteousness and justice, and want to give away and want to change something. So every time somebody sees something corrupt happening within their company, something that is clearly illegal or that is immoral, then we need people who raise up to tell about this, be it in the public or to raise the issue to responsible persons within a certain structure. And this is the activity of whistleblowing. There are basically two different approaches of whistleblowing. This is internal and external whistleblowing. I have two examples for you that you get a better understanding of this. Internal whistleblowing would be what happened in the Enron scandal. It's probably something you heard about back in 2001, one of the biggest gas companies in the world, Enron from Texas in the USA, had one of the greatest bankruptcy scandals that ever happened in the world. There were a lot of changes in the aftermath with stricter regulations, but the key important fact is the person of Sharon Watkins in this regard, because she was a whistleblower and she was an auditor within the company, and she saw that financially it was going terrible. The company had a lot of offshore banks, contact to offshore banks, had contact to tax havens. It was quite significant, and she realized that the company was shortly before bankruptcy. So she wanted to raise that issue to the CEO, and so she wrote an anonymous letter to the management board where she basically summarized all these issues and raised a concern to the management board. And a little bit later, she even went there in person and explained everything. And in the court case that followed to this, she was one of the key witnesses for the persecution of the people who were responsible for this. So this is a very good example for an internal whistleblowing, because she wanted to actually have and is as an internal issue, and she wanted to raise that issue internally. She waited, I think, 6 or 7 months for publishing her findings, and gave them time to do something about internally, and she only did publish it when nothing happened. So this is a good example of an internal whistleblowing. And external whistleblowing, I think the name of Edward Snowden is something that you should have at least heard of, because he made the term of whistleblowing international recognizable to everybody, not just to legal persons, but everybody heard of the term of whistleblowing. At least in Europe, everybody heard of it because of Edward Snowden, because this is something that concerned each and everybody. Edward Snowden was a computer intelligence consultant for the NSA, the National Security Agency of the USA, and within his position, he found out that the NSA and a couple of other agencies basically were gathering in personal and private and confidential data on a major scale. So they had personal information about each and every US citizen. They had private and confidential data regarding public officials of a lot of different countries. For example, the NSA had the private text messages from my German chancellor. It's crazy. And he saw that this is an issue. the NSA was arguing that they needed this information for national security reasons. And the only way he saw that something would change is to make it public. So he did something that is discussable and clearly illegal, but he took each and every single data he could find, confidential data, military data even, and he published it openly accessible to everybody. Yeah, it changed a lot because of his whistleblowing act. There were a lot of regulations, and there were a global discussion regarding data protection in the aftermath. So it clearly had an impact, and it led to change. Sadly, Edward Snowden then had to flee the country because not only there were court cases against him, but also he feared for his life because he feared that the NSA or the CIA would not take kindly to this. So he went to Russia and he became a citizen there. But that should show you the effect of whistleblowing and the impact it can have. Both these cases had major impacts on the global aspect. And it is an effective way. If you look, for example, at the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners from the USA, we have a statistic that says just within the last year, 42.4% of all the corporate fraud detections, all that they detected was regarding some whistleblowing reports. So it is the most effective instrument to actively combat corruption, because in my opinion, you can have the best anti-corruption law there is, but it doesn't help you if you can't enforce it. And you can only enforce it if you have the knowledge about corrupt cases, if you have evidence and witnesses. And this is why we need whistleblowers in the world. And this is also why we need whistleblowing protection acts, because it is hard for those people to put themselves at risks. Because, for example, if you're working in a company and you're giving away confidential data, you have to fear termination of your job, and this can have an existential crisis. It can even get worse. We will talk later about a case in South Africa where a woman was murdered because of whistleblowing. So we need the government to put a law into place to protect us for this. And this is why we need whistleblowing protection laws. And luckily, if we look at the global development within certain regions, we see that the whole world is discussing this topic and is actively working for change there. So today I want to show you, I don't want to talk in detail about each and every law, because I think that would be a conference of its own. But what I would like to do is give you a rough overview of certain regions in the world and what is happening there, because it's quite interesting to see that there are different approaches to the same aim. And for this, I picked the regions of Latin America, South Africa, Asia Pacific, and Europe. I on purpose left out the USA, for example, because it's rather complicated. The USA established their first whistleblowing protection act back when they were in their foundation in 1777. So there's a lot to be discussed and a long development. And that would be too long for this short presentation. So I decided to leave it out, but I think my colleague Mario Amoretti Navarro will talk a little bit about that, because this topic is the corruption in the USA. And also, if you want to know something about specific laws, like, for example, the Peruvian law, which I will talk later about, you will hear a little bit more in detail about it. I think tomorrow a colleague will discuss this specific law. So you can hear a little bit more. This is just a rough overview to give you some key points, to some takeaways, what is going on in the world right now regarding whistleblowing. So if we're looking at Latin America, let's start with that. And that's rather sad for me, because I really enjoy having this conference for you. But I must tell you that Latin America is actually one of the worst regions regarding this development, regarding whistleblowing protection laws. If you look at, for example, the International Corruption Index from Transparency International, you will clearly see that Latin America, basically almost all countries of Latin America are really in a fight for corruption. This is all of these countries are regarded high risk or very high risk with regard to corruption, bribery, money laundering. This is worse. This is a bad situation, and one of the problems, I think, is that the act of whistleblowing is not regarded as an effective instrument to fight corruption. It is in some countries, like for example Bolivia, it's quite the opposite. They are actively persecuting whistleblowers. So this is a very bad development right now. But luckily, some of the countries in Latin America already recognize this issue, and they're actively combating it. For example, Colombia at a presentation in 2016 recognized that there is a need to protect whistleblowers, and they want to implement certain laws. Mexico is right in this moment in discussions about a draft for Whistleblowing Protection Act, and countries like Chile, Jamaica, and Peru already included a law that has some aspects regarding whistleblowing, and this is really a step forward, a step really in the right direction. Especially the Peruvian law is quite interesting because it has a different approach than what we are used to in the EU. And it is interesting. So it's about, I want to give you a quick overview. It's about the law 3424. I think it's called La Ley de Compliance. And it was enforced in 2018 and 2019. And it is interesting because, yeah, the bad thing is only for very specific areas regarding bribery, collusion, money laundering, assets, and financing terrorism. So very, very specific areas. But it is quite interesting because it is one of the first laws in Peru where it introduces a penalty directly to a company rather to a natural person. And this is very interesting because the Peruvian law doesn't have a requirement for private entity to establish something like a whistleblowing system, so a system where people can anonymously send reports to. But it has a very, very detailed recommendation what to implement. And the law says if you don't implement it, you have perhaps administrative liability and can get a penalty later on if something goes wrong. And this is something that is, yeah, a major development compared to the other countries, and it is a step in the right direction. Also, there are a lot of very good and detailed laws regarding data protection, and there is some aspects of a security that you can't get a dismissal if you make a report in good faith. So good development, a step in the right direction. It is sad that it's only for very specific areas. Peru would need to widen that to all aspects of criminal law, and yeah, especially also regarding other laws that could be of effect for regarding to whistleblowing. So hopefully there will be a development in the future, but compared to the rest of Latin America, it is a step in the right direction, and we hope to see that Latin America will improve on that one. But there is a lot good to be here that they are actively working on that. If we look at South Africa, we have something very interesting that I would like to tell you, because here you clearly can see that a good law doesn't lead to an anti-corrupt system if it isn't a law that can be enforced. Here, South Africa implemented the Protected Disclosure Act back in 2000, so it's quite a long time, and it has some good points in it, like requirements to establish internal procedures dealing with improper proprieties. It has dismissal securities clauses in it. It is a good law in itself, but the problem is there are no sanctions or legal risks whatsoever if you decide not to follow the law. And this is a problem, and that leads to numerous corruption scandals in South Africa just within the last 3 years. So all the examples I mentioned here on the left are examples within the last 3 years. We have a prison doctor who exposed poor health conditions. He was immediately suspended. He tried to get his job back, and he went to the labor law court and said, look, there's this Protected Disclosure Act, can't be. And he never got reinstated. Same for a civil servant who made serious allegations against the former Minister of Justice. He was immediately suspended right after he made those allegations. And last, a woman who exposed corrupt conditions regarding the procurement of COVID-19 protective equipment from the government. She made that claim public, and short after she was murdered. We can't say for sure if it was with regard to her whistleblowing act, but yeah, there are signs that it was, there was somewhat with regard to this. So this is a very, very bad situation, because we have a good law, but it isn't enforced or is enforceable, and thus you have a corrupt system there. I hope that the South African law will take the lead to change. They are actively combating that right now, and I think they are shortly before an amendment of this law, and hopefully they will make some amendments, like, for example, in the Peruvian law, a penalty for companies that don't follow this law would really help in this regard. And I'm really interested to see where this will develop in the future. Next, let's look at the Asia-Pacific region. I want to focus a little bit on China, because Japan and Australia is very good laws and very interesting laws, because they're very detailed. But if you look at them a little bit more into detail, you will quickly realize that they amended their laws accordingly to the EU Whistleblowing Protective Act, so the directive. And this is quite interesting because it's a very comparable law, and you can clearly see that the EU had an influence on those laws. So I will talk about those two laws with regard to the EU law later on. China is a really interesting country with regard to whistleblowing laws, because President Xi Jinping specifically said that corruption is a presidential matter, and that he wants to actively combat that. We heard from Liu Chang that the criminal law aspect of China is, you see a lot of comparisons to German law, because they looked at Germany for guidance there. And with the procedural law, you see that they're clearly amending something like US system. And with whistleblowing, is quite interesting, because they are also is very comparable to the system that we have in the USA. Because the US for a long time tries to give away rewards if people do give away reports, whistleblowing reports to the government, they get a reward. And same as in China, recently they implemented measures to give away rewards, incentives. If you report something of some major violations, for example, in the finance sector, to the government, you would get a reward. And it's quite a significant reward. It's up to 1 million yuan. I think that is about 500,000 Peruvian sot. So quite a lot of money, and really interesting to see where this is going, because it actively increased the amount of reports the government receives within the last 2 years in about 74%. So it had quite the impact on the people. Also, China is establishing industry-specific whistleblowing rules, and here same thing: financial rewards if they get reports of some significance, and obligation for implementing reporting channels. It is very interesting for me, because this is a system that was highly discussed within the EU, and it is quite highly discussed within Latin America, if such a reward system is of interest, because on the one hand, it definitely helps to improve the number of reports you will receive, because a lot of people would like this reward and they will actively do something about it. But on the other hand, it could increase the number of false complaints just to get a reward. So I'm very I'm conflicted about this. I see that the USA is doing this for a long time, and they're not having any problems with this. China, let's see where this is going. A raise of 74% just within 2 years. Could be that there are a lot of false complaints, but this is a very interesting development. So with Japan and Australia, I already told you I would like to do this in comparison to the EU law, because it's very comparable. It is a very good law, and Japan and Australia are doing basically what the EU is doing. They want to highly regulate the system of whistleblowing and whistleblowing protection. So if we look at the EU, let's quickly talk about the UK, because they're not part of the EU any longer, and thus they are not part of this whistleblowing protection directive. Rather, the UK implemented their own whistleblowing protection law, the Public Interest Disclosure Act, the Interest Disclosure Act in 1998, and it is very, let's say it's a rather basic law. There are obligations to put compliance policies into place, to have a system where you can at least implement how they can whistleblow, so an email address, for example, but there is no obligation whatsoever for reporting channels where people can anonymously send information. There is no deadlines when to receive information, what is happening with their information that they gave away, nothing of that sort. So it's a rather basic disclosure act. It is comparable to the South African rule. However, it is more detailed, because it has actually the obligation for companies to put something into place. So that's good. But the real topic of today that I want to discuss a little bit more into detail is the EU whistleblowing directive. Something very interesting, because you should know, if the European Union makes a directive, then each and every member state of the European Union is contractually obligated to make a national law accordingly on the basis of this directive. And so with the publishing of this EU whistleblower protection directive, each and every country now, so 26 countries are now obligated to make a whistleblowing protective law. And this is a significant change, because the countries are not obligated to take this directive and put it into place word by word. They can change it if they want to. They just have to follow the rules of the European Commission. So if they change something majorly in comparison to the EU directive, there could be a breach of contract of the European contract. But they can amend certain things, and the countries of the European Union are using that. And there is quite a large discussion within the EU, so large of a discussion that we are expecting numerous legal proceedings now, the EU against, for example, France, Denmark, or even Germany, because the first thing you should know is that almost no country of the EU had put a national law into place, even if the deadline was 1 year ago. So we should have now 26 new laws regarding whistleblowing protection, and we have 3 at the moment. So the nations were really hesitant to put that law into place, because there's a lot of discussion about it. And the laws that are already discussed at this moment, so especially the French law, the Denmark law, and the German law, which is a draft at the moment, their discussion is of great significance, so great that it will have a legal proceeding, perhaps. So perhaps first of all, what is the EU Whistleblowing Protection Directive, and why is this so controversial? Well, it is a very, very detailed law. It regulates basically everything. So it says that each and every company within the EU that has more than 50 employees has to implement its own whistleblowing reporting channels. So you have to have a system where people can report you certain issues, and this has to be its own system for each company with 50 people or more. And 50 people is not that much, so it is applicable for a lot of companies within Europe. And then there are strict deadlines. So if you report something within this reporting channel, you have to get an information just within 7 days that they have received that information, and that they are now working with it. And then another 90 days later, the responsible person for the reporting channel has to tell the whistleblower actively what they are doing with that information and what they are investigating right now and what is going on. And if the whistleblower is not happy about the development, he can take away the information and give it to an external reporting channel, because now each and every country in the EU and the EU itself is obligated to implement an external channel, so a government channel where you can also give information to and report to. And if the whistleblower decides to take away the information from the company isn't allowed to use that information anymore. So this is so significant, and such a significant change in all those directions that is highly discussed. And one of the most significant problems is that there is no hierarchy in between the external and the internal whistleblowing reporting channels. So there is no obligation for an employee, for example, to tell something first to the company and then to the government. They can decide on their own what they would like to choose. And this is a problem. But the most significant problem for bigger companies like mine, and this is where it gets interesting, is a big group, and multinational group has usually, a lot of different entities, like within Europe, 10, 20, 30, 100 different entities in each country. And the problem is, according to this law, each and every entity of a group has to have its own local whistleblowing channel with a responsible person who is able to investigate accordingly. And information has to be handled locally and can't be given away to the group. And this is not how things work in a big group, because usually you would centralize expertise. So you would have one global compliance department who's handling such cases, and not someone locally who handles it from just this entity. This isn't how things are done there. And this is something that the EU saw, and the EU clearly saw in a and they expanded in a statement that they don't want this. They want decentralized organization, because they want to have that each European Union citizen has the ability to have to make a local report and to have their local persons to talk to, and they don't want to have this centralized systems. The nations didn't agree on it, so the Denmark law didn't implement that at all, and the French didn't include that in the law, and the Germans they tried their best to make a somewhat discussable implementation, where they said, okay, look, we agree on this, but there has to be a certain group privilege, and this group privilege makes it that bigger companies can have one system, and it is enough for to be sufficient for this law. Let's see where this is going, but it is very interesting, because you see with this some key takeaways that are really interesting. And this is where it gets interesting, because all these regions, these countries where we talk about, have basically the same aim. They want to actively protect whistleblowers, and they want the people to make reports, because they acknowledge that this is an effective way to combat corruption. But there are different approaches to this. So if we look at, for example, the EU and countries like Japan and Australia, they want to highly regulate everything. So they are giving out exact rules how to handle this, how to implement compliance reporting systems for whistleblowing, how to make certain reports and deadlines, very detailed regulations, and very detailed protective acts that they are basically protected for giving away each. It doesn't matter what is, as long as it is concerning EU law, it is protected. So very wide protection, and they want to rely on the responsibility of each person, that they have some feeling of righteousness or justice to give away information, and they want to give them the security to make that as easy as possible. Then we have the approach from countries like Japan, countries like China and the USA, who are clearly going a different way. They want to regulate, but mostly they want to give you an incentive. They want to give you a reward and give you the good feeling that you're doing something right. And you as a person not only have this feeling of righteousness, but you also get a financial reward for actively reporting an issue. So completely different approach. And then we have countries like, for example, Latin America, where we don't want to enforce each and everything, but rather we would like to give this responsibility to the company and say, look, do this, or it will be bad for you. And UK is very similar to this. So this is 3 different approaches to the same aim. But what you can take away from this is, no matter which approach you take, you see a clear change in the world. Whistleblowing is a very hot topic in the world. It's getting attention on an international basis, and each and every region has its own thoughts about it, but they're thinking about it. And so it's getting really important to talk about this. And I am very interested in seeing how the development will turn out in the next years, especially once the 26 EU laws were made, and what impact it will have on an international basis if there will be more discussion about this. So I hope this was very interesting for you to get a feeling about what is happening in the world. If you have questions, I'm obviously happy to answer them. If I see that there is not a lot of time for this, but if you have more detailed questions, please contact me on LinkedIn, contact me on my email address. I'm happy to answer you. I would like to thank you again, especially the Colegio de Abogados de Arequipa for this invitation, and my dear colleague, Dr. Mario Amoretti Navarro, for this invitation. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I hope it was an interesting topic for you.
Muy bien, muchas gracias, doctor Knecht, por su participación. Invito a la audiencia que tenemos a poder realizar sus preguntas en forma directa o a través del chat que tenemos en el Zoom. Doctor Mario Amoretti.
Sí, yo creo que haría primero, yo tengo una pregunta para el doctor Knecht, pero haría primero una pequeña síntesis de su exposición, como me fue solicitado por el colegio. Brevemente, el doctor Knecht, como mencionaba en su exposición, o antes de iniciar la exposición, es un compliance officer, responsable de la implementación del sistema de whistleblowing en su empresa, y conoce el tema. Entonces, él lo que nos explicaba al principio era en qué consiste el whistleblowing, o canal de denuncias, como lo diríamos en castellano. Utilizamos mucho la terminología anglosajona, pero whistleblowing es canal de denuncia. Y él nos mencionaba que es básicamente dar información confidencial, en principio, de una empresa a la misma empresa o a terceros, de contenido ilegal. Y que esta misma idea de compartir información que podríamos llamar privilegiada, podría ser considerada de la perspectiva clásica del derecho laboral como una ilegalidad, pero que la práctica nos ha demostrado que es importante para poder combatir la corrupción. Y él ponía 2 ejemplos. El primer ejemplo al inicio era el de una señorita llamada Sharon Watkins, que es conocida por el famoso caso de Enron, de criminalidad empresarial, en donde esta señorita, que trabajaba para la empresa Enron, informa dentro de la empresa de actos delictivos que ella había detectado y que van a posteriormente sacar a la luz el caso de delincuencia empresarial de Enron. Y esto lo llamaba un whistleblowing interno. Y nos ponía otro ejemplo diferente, que era el caso de Edward Snowden, como un caso de whistleblowing externo, donde él mostraba actos delictivos que cometían el servicio de la Oficina de Inteligencia o la Oficina de Inteligencia Nacional de Seguridad de los Estados Unidos, con sus políticas de seguimiento hacia terceros. Y nos mostraba que este era un claro ejemplo al mostrar información de terceras, personas externas a la empresa. Luego fue yendo interesantemente cada región, empezó por la región de Latinoamérica, explicando y diciendo que sí, se trata de una jurisdicción de alto riesgo, prácticamente toda Latinoamérica, riesgos desde corrupción hasta, en el caso de whistleblowing, con muchos peligros, porque hasta en el caso de Bolivia mostraba y daba cuenta que se reportaban casos de homicidios a periodistas que delataban hechos delictivos. Sin embargo, resaltaba la regulación en el caso peruano, de la ley 30, 2, para el caso de la llamada ley de compliance, para explicar que esta ley 30424 lo que hacía era contemplar un sistema de whistleblowing, claro, de manera muy, muy general, con un reglamento que la regulaba, pero que era un inicio. Luego la ley de Sudáfrica, con mayores, que la consideraba una buena ley, con muchas regulaciones, aunque que en la práctica no había tenido los resultados que se deseaba. Nos explicaba la China, donde también interesantemente hacía una conexión con la exposición de la profesora Liu Chang de China, que tuvimos esta mañana, haciendo referencia a la influencia que tiene el derecho alemán en el caso de otras jurisdicciones. Luego, y también hacía referencia al beneficio que se daba de 1 millón de wons, que es básicamente 400.000 nuevos soles a aquellas personas que colaboraban con el gobierno a fin de delatar hechos delictivos. Pasaba la regulación dentro de la regulación norteamericana por su complejidad de lado, y nos explicaba que esta ley es en realidad una directiva de la Unión Europea, obliga a aquellas empresas que tienen más de 50 trabajadores a implementar sistemas de whistleblowing, sistemas de canal de denuncia, y si no lo hacen están sujetas a sanciones. Y esto lleva a que las empresas tengan ciertos problemas, porque la ley o esta directiva obliga a que cada estado tenga un departamento dedicado de su propio país dedicado a estos casos. Y los consorcios, las empresas, los grupos empresariales quieren que cada uno, que haya una entidad centralizada que canalice todo. Y esto es precisamente lo que se quiere evitar para transparencia y democracia se podría decir democracia al momento de analizar este tipo de casos según la jurisdicción que se trate. Esa sería la síntesis que yo podría dar. Evidentemente es un tema bastante interesante, muy nuevo para el Perú, como lo ha dicho el doctor Knecht. Le agradezco bastante, y antes de formular mi pregunta le devuelvo la palabra al doctor Astete para que pueda moderar y comentarnos si hay todavía un poquito de tiempo para formular al menos una pregunta al doctor Knecht. Daniel made a presentation, and I said I have a question, but I want to return the word to Dr. Astete in order that he moderate and give permission, if that is possible, due to time reasons. Usted tiene la palabra, doctora Astete.
Ok, perdón, lo siento, muchas gracias. Tengo una pregunta. ¿Qué puede hacer un empleado que usa el sistema de denuncia de la empresa y luego es despedido de la empresa?
I will translate the question. I had a question, but I think that they have liked really your conference, Daniel, and that's why they already had one. They have the question is the following. They said, what can do an employee if he
Yeah.
used the whistleblowing system, but despite of the regulation, he get fired? I mean, that's a good question because you are also a lawyer, so you have the both criminal and labor law on your hands. That's the question.
Yeah, I mean, that would highly depend on the country. So let's just for the sake of it speak about Germany because I'm a German lawyer. So if we would have something like this in Germany, and we would have a whistleblowing protective act, a whistleblowing law that would have a clause clearly in it that says that a dismissal is basically illegal if you do something in good faith, then you can appeal to the labor law court of your country, and you can say, look, obviously this is an illegal dismissal because of the section in the in this whistleblowing protective act. And then the court, the labor law court, would have to have a discussion whether a certain report was made in good faith or not. So this would be the main discussion, would be, is there some reasons to believe that you made an allegation just to improve your position, for example, or would this be just in good faith a report to have raised attention to a certain issue? And if you can, yeah, if it would depend on who has to prove it. In Germany, it would be the employer who has to prove that this report was not made in good faith. And so if the employer can prove it, then the dismissal would be rightful and the labor law court would dismiss the case. If the employer cannot prove it, then the employee would have the right to go back to the company and to work there.
Okay, many thanks. I will summarize the answer. Voy a hacer un resumen de la respuesta a la pregunta. El doctor Knecht nos dice que todo depende de primero si la denuncia fue hecha con mala fe. Al mismo tiempo nos dice que la carga de la prueba se encuentra por parte de la empresa, de acuerdo al sistema. Él se está remitiendo al sistema en Alemania. En el caso que la empresa no pueda probar que la denuncia ha sido de mala fe, en este caso el empleado tendría derecho a la restitución laboral dentro de la empresa y en caso que no lo tenga, no se vería en caso que haya sido la denuncia hecha de mala fe, sí no se vería beneficiado por la ley o por la reglamentación de whistleblowing o de sistema de denuncia. Esa sería la respuesta. Yo tenía una pregunta, pero veo que el doctor Andía tiene una pregunta también, así que le daría preferencia a él y luego yo, si hay tiempo, haría una pregunta adicional, que creo que tenemos todavía 3 minutos.
Muchas gracias, doctora Moretti. Saludos al doctor Daniel. Muy concreto, agradecería que me pueda ayudar con la traducción para que se entienda mejor, la pueda entender mejor el doctor Daniel. Él ha señalado, como es claro en su exposición, que Perú tiene una regulación no obligatoria del whistleblowing, pero claro, bajo la lógica peruana, la implementación de los programas de cumplimiento no es una obligación legal, sino es, por el contrario, una situación de autorregulación, ¿no? Es decir, si yo quiero tener una mejor organización, pues implemento estas medidas de compliance. En cuanto a los canales de denuncia, Perú tiene tanto la regulación de la ley 3424 como la regulación pública, es decir, tenemos normas directamente que establecen canales de denuncias por parte de privados en las entidades, e incluso de los funcionarios adentro, con medidas de protección, etc. La pregunta en realidad es, considerando que Perú es un país que todavía no ha desarrollado mucho los canales de denuncia, ¿cree que el doctor Daniel ¿Cuál es un mejor sistema para ir introduciendo esta regulación en países como Perú y en Latinoamérica? Que sea dentro de la misma empresa que se generen los canales de denuncia, todo el sistema de denuncia, o es que la tercerización puede ser un camino por el que podríamos ir optando para ir, digamos, adaptándonos a esta cultura, ¿no? Y cuando hablo de tercerización, tercerizar hacia empresas especializadas en este tipo de trabajos de recepcionar, investigar, generar, digamos, todo el trabajo para poder terminar con los elementos que puedan llevar hacia si el riesgo genera o no un peligro para la empresa.
Muchas gracias, doctor Andía. Solamente una pequeña introducción para el público. El doctor Andía es miembro de la mesa redonda de este certamen, ha sido ex viceministro de Justicia y también ha sido uno de los que ha trabajado muy intensamente las normas de compliance en el Perú. Daniel, just for you an introduction, Dr. Andía was Vice Minister of Justice in Peru some months ago. So, and he has worked with the Peruvian compliance regulation, what you the law that you just mentioned some minutes ago in your presentation. And he thank you for the for your conference. And he said that yeah, you are right. Peru has, through the compliance law, a voluntary regulation where companies are the one saying how they will implement their system, including also whistleblowing criteria. And he said that there is also some regulation, but regarding just public entities.
Yes.
His question is regarding the better way to implement a whistleblowing system in a company such Peru, where you don't have a well developed compliance culture. And he said it would be better that you have a whistleblowing system that has been carried out from the beginning till the operation by the company itself, or would it be better that you use an external service, an external person that administrates the whistleblowing system?
Yeah,
would be the question for him.
Yep. So that's actually a very great question. I'm very thankful for that. Let me first pressure that. I think the Peruvian law has really good approaches. If you look through it, you see very detailed approaches on how to implement an information channel, for example, to present irregularities, to report something. It has some very detailed things in there, which helps a company because as it is only a recommendation, it is very good for them to take them on by the hand and to say, okay, this is what you have to do to make a good implementation and to have a good system. And I think the approach that the Peruvian law did, that they said we want to give the responsibility to each company to implement that, is a really good one, because in the end, it is something that it should be the responsibility of a company to say, okay, we want to invest in our internal due diligence and in our internal affairs and want to implement the system, and we have the money and the power to do so, or we are only a very young company who want to establish each other and we can't afford the systems right now. So the kind of giving away the responsibility and actively teaching people about the issues of compliance is a very good approach. What is missing there, in my opinion, is the opportunity. What can people do if a company decides not to implement a system? Then an employee has the problem that he has nowhere to go. He can go to his direct supervisor and tell him about it, but he could risk a dismissal, and this is a problem. So I think what is interesting is the approach that the EU did when they implemented a general country-wide external reporting channel, so that, for example, Germany has to have a governmental external reporting channel, and you can give a reporter information to this external channel rather than to the internal channel of the company. And especially in Peru, that could help, because now companies who chose to have the administrative liability and to not include such a system, employees of such a company wouldn't have no system whatsoever where they can report to, but they could go to an external governmental overseen reporting channel and raise their issue there, and that could, in my opinion, improve it. I don't dare to give improvements to such an honorable colleague, but this is something, in my opinion, that could help here, and I think it's a very interesting approach from the EU, and it could help for other countries where there is a lot of corruption issues.
Thank you, Daniel. We are running out of time. I will summarize that and the word after that to Dr. Astete in order that he finish up the session and go through the next speaker, but I make the summary. El doctor Knecht nos ha dicho de que él considera que la ley está, que la pregunta es muy buena y que la ley, en realidad, la ley peruana de compliance, él considera que está bien hecha, que considera de que sí, que es cierto, en principio la empresa es la que tiene la batuta de desarrollar el mejor programa de compliance que se adapte a sus necesidades, y lo que considera que falta solamente es el caso de cubrir qué ocurre cuando la empresa no permite dar un buen sistema de whistleblowing a sus trabajadores y quedan en riesgo de no ser protegidos. Y él considera que de donde se puede aprender un poquito es a través de la directiva de la Unión Europea en casos de whistleblowing, porque esta les permite a aquellas personas que no obtienen este beneficio en su empresa a recurrir a una instancia estatal, gubernamental, que pueda cubrir esa necesidad y darles protección. Pero ya no puedo dar mayores detalles de la explicación del doctor Knecht porque estamos corriendo de tiempo. La doctora Herrera la he visto ya conectada. Le doy la palabra al doctor Astete para que le agradezca al ponente y yo le formularé la pregunta al doctor Knecht en otra oportunidad. Usted tiene la palabra, doctor Astete.
Ok, muchas gracias, doctor Daniel Knecht. Queremos agradecer su participación en este congreso. Reciba saludos de nuestro decano, la Junta Directiva y todos los abogados acá de Arequipa. Esperamos también tenerlo en una próxima oportunidad, compartiendo algunos temas tan interesantes como los ha hecho hoy. Muchas gracias y esperamos volverlos a ver. Bien.
Muchas gracias.
Bien. Bueno, ya tenemos ya a nuestra próxima conferencia magistral. También viene un tema muy interesante, denominado la extinción de dominio como herramienta en la lucha contra la corrupción. Estará a cargo de la doctora Mercedes Herrera Guerrero, quien es socia